information individuals have which they will...
What I'm going to do is now I'm going to go around each table in turn and just ask for the person who's feeding back to feedback on what they feel that the discussions from their tables, what they feel the main barriers to progress and gaps in research, what opportunities they're not currently exploiting, and what structures do they think we need to address them, but also making reference, what are the actions we need to address these things? You know, what's the kind of the wish list or the to-do list that we need to carry on after today?
Surgery is really
barriers and gaps. So there might be a hesitation with the previous experience from the Euromos trial and the complexities and different thoughts from different people, all that. There is good in it, but it might also be a barrier to do it again. But we need to do it again. The key issue, what we felt, was that there is actually a lack of interaction and information and connection between all the different disciplines. If this is the scientists, the clinicians, the different specialities within the clinicians, we are all here together, we have heard all these talks, and we have to say a lot to each other, and we really need to bring it all together to make it work. The other gap or barrier was the consent procedures. We don't get tissue or consent from everybody because it's too complex, too many hurdles, and we need to have an opt-out mechanism rather than patients are very willing to give the tissue and the parents to contribute to research, but also we need to really make use of it and not just store it. And also data collection is inconsistent. We need consistent mechanisms. And one key thing is if we do trials, we have the tissue stored, that's not enough. We need to have more bedside to bench interaction to go back and actually see why did non-responders non-respond and why did the responders respond. Just to have a 30% response rate doesn't mean we know who those patients are up front. The other area is we actually don't know where does osteosarcoma come from. So what is the normal bone development versus what is osteosarcoma? And even the interaction with the scientists and biologists beyond sarcoma or osteosarcoma is key.
Great, thanks. And did you talk about, for any of those issues, some of the things that we could do, some of the people we could speak to? Just thinking about, for example, you know, take one, consent. Is anyone in the room engaged on the consent issue currently with regulators or anyone else?
About consent, I take your point about having an opt-out consent, except having access to tissue, if you don't have the information, the clinical information, is of very limited value. Yeah, and therefore the whole point about getting consent, it's very easy to have access to material. You don't, in most cases, you can have access to material without consent. That's not an issue, right? You may have to cover the costs. In order to be able to have access to long-term clinical data, to also then have blood samples and plasma samples, you have to have consent for that because you're taking a blood sample. And most of the consent now is based around accessing clinical information. And so getting the tissue actually is not the problem. And so opting out, we have to consent patients if you want their data.
What we meant was really that you don't give consent for your data to be registered for the tumour registry. And while there are problems with it, now when cancers are registered, there's a lot more data collected, and it's hopefully will only improve with time. You don't give consent for that, that happens. So the same point would be that as part of that registry, I agree with you, there's no point having tissue without the data, you would have the tissue as well. And so you have to opt out not to give it, rather than give consent for it. So that would require a change in the law, etc. I understand that. And the other barrier in that is people not being offered to give that consent. That's the other barrier. So the data's there, the tissue's there, but you're not given the opportunity to give consent, and patients are not the barrier. It's often the person offering the consent, so the clinicians, etc., etc.
One of the issues, I think, about doing genomic data on kids, certainly, is not so much about the tumour that they've got, it's about other information that you might turn up with the genomic information. You might discover they've got P53 mutation. You might discover things that have influence on them or their family. And that's does not mean that they won't be wanting to do it, but that's a bigger discussion. And when you make the discussion bigger, you make it harder.
Thanks. So that is a huge issue, and that's an issue that comes up again in lots of discussions, lots of cancer types. But maybe there's some of the things around making it as easy as possible for people to consent as well, which is the other issue raised then, Bernadette. So
what we felt was that we needed a better infrastructure to support researchers of all disciplines in addressing osteosarcoma. And so that looks like a network, it looks like a supported network, so a network that has like a project manager who can make time, or make other people, particularly clinicians, time efficient, but not just clinicians, but also pathologists and so on and so forth, time efficient. I think we have ICONIC coming, and we have to exploit that far beyond, I think, what its remit might be as just in the grant application, as a sort of magnet for lots of other activities around osteosarcoma. So we need to find ways to improve the communication between all of us, both between those working in the same disciplines. We had quite a lot of discussion about radiology, for example, but also very importantly between disciplines, so basic scientists and surgeons right across. So I think that's the main things. But I would like to make the point that it's not that we haven't made progress over the last however many years, well, we usually say 30 years. We have made progress, and if we hadn't made progress, we probably wouldn't be sitting here. And if you look at European data, there's a bit of improvement in survival as well. So we have made progress, just not enough.
In terms of the barriers and gaps, I think the first thing that was said, that probably sums it all and has been said before, is kind of knowledge about who is doing what. We did touch on the consent, we touched on the patient pathway, we touched on wonderful initiatives that are already ongoing, the 100,000 genomes and the GSIP, but making the most out of the information that's going there and matching it, the clinic and the genomic data, matching it. We've talked about that a long time. So everybody wants to know what's going in. I think there was something that came out of here that not everyone quite understood what the GSIP was. So again, education, training, dissemination of information is massive. Another thing we talked about was lack of models for osteosarcoma, or good models, or lack of knowing who has the models. There's 3 talks here. Oh, you've got some mice, you've got this, that, and the other. We didn't really know about that. So first of all, understanding what is going on, and then how can we do it better. The opportunities on our table, again, is linking and aligning to everything that's already going on. I think that the GSIP is extremely powerful for sarcoma and an osteosarcoma thread within that. Again, nothing should be separate from each other, joining together for us to learn from each other. One of the other challenges, and I think this has to be an opportunity too, is how does the NHS and the research work better together? So much is in the NHS and we're not exploiting it. There's very little resource. We understand that. But there must be a way for us to get more out from the NHS, and bearing in mind that's where all our patients are and that's where most of us work. Using other infrastructures like the NCR clinical studies groups to link, to help us move these things forward, I think is great. In terms of actions or things needed, yes, we talked about understanding what's going on. A website does sound like a helpful thing, but not another website somewhere else. It must be accessible to everybody who's coming from different worlds to know that it can be linked, and so that we can know what everybody's doing. People to help the infrastructure for that. And then working groups, perhaps to come out of this to address specific aspects of it. And then the final thing we also came back to was people, training, and education. So the training is keeping things afloat at the lowest, not the lowest, at the minimal level. The education is part of what we're doing here, or disseminating this. Adrian talked about, again, educating us all about the GSIP and getting everyone to buy into things that are ongoing. But again, people, sustaining scientists in osteosarcoma research through PhDs and postdocs, and even perhaps sort of clinician scientists in terms of wards. And we talked about the lack of pathologists. I'm not sure whether that's something we can solve for all pathology, and that's another big aspect. And oncologists, we don't have enough of them. So people, what is very important too.
But the first thing really was what the other groups have said, really was about lack of collaboration and links between multiple different disciplines. And we did touch first on Brexit and the concern sort of geopolitically what it's going to do across Europe. But even just nationally, we really felt that the lack of awareness of what people are doing around the country. We discussed also the lack of collaboration at the moment between different funders, and this is a real first case where that's worked today, and that would be a real potential to improve things in the future. We discussed it again as part of those big collaborative projects. Part of the barriers have been reticence because of previous failures, and that perception still lingering really with people. Second thing we discussed, and again this isn't solely just a research issue to osteosarcoma, but also just in general public, we talked about awareness, but I think this has an impact on research as well. So we talked about lack of the public and primary care awareness of osteosarcoma, but in terms of maintaining the group in the room in the future, awareness amongst scientists and clinicians of this research field to make sure people are still coming through is important. And then finally, we talked about a little bit of funding and specific opportunities, but also specifically for training as well. So again, as already been talked about, in terms of opportunities, we clearly agree that building into the currently existing initiatives is by far the best way of improving this, and Genomics England, the GSIP, and then ICONIC clearly are those best opportunities that exist. And integrating those two together may be important, but also using both as a platform to connect the different groups you've already talked about could be a real opportunity. And one thing we discussed is using it as a regular forum to update the different communities, bringing people together either in specific streams for scientists and clinicians separately or all together. We did touch briefly on sort of lack of awareness of tissue bank resources around, and clearly there are already initiatives to improve that between the different biobanks, but just at least having a national UK tissue registry, which I think there is already an initiative in place to make sure that people can search what is available and get access to it afterwards. We had a very brief discussion at the end about one very small thing that we've done to improve scientific collaboration between centres, just is funding opportunities to allow visits between units, just to allow transfer of skills and just improve those networks. So that's really the only additional things we had.
The biggest thing that for me is coming through is just that we need more interaction, more collaboration, knowledge sharing, and maybe to broaden this conversation out to some additional people. Does everyone feel like that's kind of the main thing? I'd be a bit worried if everyone said the main thing we need is a carbon iron machine. It's a bit trickier to fund. But I mean, I think one of the things that as a community we can do is bring people together. There's a huge amount of expertise just in this room and a huge amount of passion to do that. So I think that's a really positive thing. And then the things around people, training, new agents, etc. These are all really important things, but maybe through some form of structure, or I think the point was made a few times, building on some of the really exciting things that are happening now feels like a way forward.
We talk quite a lot around about the way that research has been funded in the past in terms of goal-driven and drug therapy-driven. And actually there's lots of very simple questions that probably are very easy and quite cheap to answer, which represent a huge clinical problem. We also talked about networks and the importance of putting people in touch with people, and actually maybe in other cancer types like breast cancer and prostate cancer, where you've got lots and lots of researchers, perhaps we should be trying to focus our research as a community to what we think the important things are at the moment, rather than all going off in different directions.
Next steps. So I've used this phrase with a few people today. I think one of the things from the funders of today, from ourselves, from everyone in the room is, we don't want this meeting to be the proverbial holiday romance, where everyone's come and had a lovely time and learned a lot, and then it kind of fades with time. This is one of the reasons why we really want to spend some time capturing people's thoughts and trying to pin down some clear, at least, well, if not clear actions, at least a direction of travel of where to go next. So just to say that Bone Cancer Research Trust, Children with Cancer UK, and certainly we are also pleased to help as well, are going to be following up from this meeting, collecting all of the notes from the tables, and then there will be a follow-up from this meeting. It's really good because I think there's kind of quite a lot of consensus from the tables, and a lot of it is around fostering more collaboration and building on the things that already exist that feel like a strength to the UK. Just before I finally sum up, I will give a notification as well on the money point, which is interesting actually. No one went for the how much things will cost, but Children with Cancer UK next week will be announcing their next treatment research call, which will be for around £3 million in total. But £500,000 of that will be ring-fenced for osteosarcoma research. So just to give you that plug at the end.
At the moment, I think we've got quite a lot of infrastructure set up and iconic. What we need now is for the centres and the individual PIs in those centres who treat and diagnose bone tumours is to open it in a timely manner and put patients on the study.
I agree that we're coming up to a stage where we're going to pick trials, and you're right, it takes a lot of money and a lot of time to write the protocol, get the ethical agreement, get it running. If the trial fails, someone's going to come up with drug Y, and you have to do it all again. So it seems to me now is the right time to be thinking in terms of a platform, multi-arm, multi-stage trial, designed from scratch so that you can bring different arms in, and if an arm doesn't work, you drop it out, but you don't start again. You can feed in the next arm, the next research question. Now would be a good time to do that, because there will be new things coming on stream. We should be prepared for it.
We've been talking about collaboration all afternoon. I think if we are going to think about doing clinical trials, then we should be at least talking to our colleagues that work in different areas of Europe and across the ocean. We've talked about perhaps some of the challenges of combining the drugs that seem furthest forward. There's probably more than one trial that needs to be done. Again, they should complement each other if they're going to be small early phase trials. But looking at the bigger pictures, I think we all need to be talking together to achieve a consensus going forward.
It's all about collaboration and us working together. And one of the things I found out over the last, I suppose, year in terms of trying to put this GSIP together is actually, it's terribly time consuming in terms of, it doesn't give me much time to diagnose osteosarcomas and the like. So I think what would benefit the community at large and actually bring us all together would be the investment of a very good coordinator, so that I wouldn't, and Sandra and various people, the EJs, you know, if Sybil, if you want to get samples, they don't have to come to me, because that's terribly time consuming. But if we had somebody who could coordinate it, probably they would have to have an understanding of the science, be quite a good manager, I think, and bring the community together. I think that would be very beneficial for everybody, and possibly a good resource and investment.
I think if we're talking about collaboration, but we're talking not just about designing like specific trials, I think, this is what came in from the room, but also around workforce and training and awareness and engaging with funders at an early stage. You know, I think these things are bigger than individual studies and maybe some of the things to address initially. I think there's a huge opportunity in the room to think about what are the key immediate priorities that we can get things trucking, you know, and we've got an opportunity as well with the funders to have a meeting after this as well about all of the ways in which we need to follow up. So and that will be obviously a key discussion point now, which I think is fantastic. And I think as well we need to think about this wider consortium, consortium group initiative, you know, when's a group not an initiative. We need that discussion as well, I think. I think there's a big prize here, I think, and this is, from my point of view, very exciting.
And now as the meeting comes to a close, and lots of other people to thank, first and foremost, it has to be Zoe Davison from BCRT, who really has provided all the logistic and organisational aspects of this. Also finding lots of people that are in this room, understanding a lot of what's going on and bringing us all together and sorting it all out. So please, a big round of applause to Zoe. Then again, I'd like to thank everybody who spoke this morning, some wonderful presentations, but particularly to our friends from abroad, to Stefan, who's come from Germany, and Richard, of course, from all the way across in Houston, which is rather longer to go. Then I'd like to thank, obviously, BCRT in general and Children with Cancer for supporting this, working together with us, and hearing all our views. And then finally, I see Paul has come back in to the room. Of course, we are completely indebted to you and the Biggs family for allowing us to be here today, letting this happen, and hopefully us all working together to, as we said this morning, transform osteosarcoma research in the UK going forward. So thank you very much to everybody. Somewhat unbelievably, I think it's just about 5 o'clock, and I gather there are some drinks outside. So please hang around if you can to have a drink and carry on chatting. And maybe we can set all those priorities before we go home. Thank you very much.